Welcome to those who are joining. We're just going to wait one more minute and then we will get started. So let me say again, welcome. I am delighted that you can all join us today. This is the fourth and last webinar in a series called On the Right Track, the Transformative Potential of Rail. And today's webinar is titled Berlin, Beijing, Bakersfield, Station Design Insights for U.S. Rail. My name is Dr. Asha Weinstein-Agarwal, and I'm director of the Mineta Transportation Institute's National Transportation Finance Center, as well as education director for the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. By the way, MTI is a university transportation center that leads 3 competitively selected multi-university consortia focused on increasing mobility for all. Our work focuses on improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of the nation's transportation system. MTI accomplishes this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. And a side note on the subject of workforce development, people attending this webinar may be particularly interested to learn that MTI sponsors an online graduate program in transportation management that offers specialized classes in high-speed and intercity rail management, one of which is taught by one of our speakers today, Eric Eidlin. And it's even possible to earn a graduate certificate in high-speed rail management. Please check the link or the chat for a link with some more information about the program. You can also reach out to me later with questions, as I'm the faculty director for the program. But back to today's webinar. We will wrap up our exploration of more than 50 years of global high-speed rail innovation. Today, our experts will summarize key takeaways from the previous events, consider the impact of recent federal policy shifts on U.S. high-speed rail projects, and discuss how insights from world-class station design and project delivery can support the future of multimodal transit in California and beyond. I'd very much like to thank our co-sponsors. Thank you to APTA's High Speed and Intercity Passenger Rail Committee, the California High Speed Rail Authority, the High Speed Rail Alliance, and the U.S. High Speed Rail Association for supporting this series and empowering us all to learn more about the benefits of rail. Now I'm going to take a moment to introduce our 3 presenters for today, and I'll start with Eric Eidlin. As a City of San Jose station planning manager, Eric plays a leading role in the city's efforts to transform Diridon Station into a world-class multimodal hub. As a fellow of the German Marshall Fund of the U.S., Eric published a widely cited report on high-speed rail station planning in France and Germany that drew lessons for California. He's also an MTI research associate and, as I mentioned, an instructor in our graduate program. Next, we have Heidi Sokolowsky. Heidi is a founding partner at Urban Field Studio, an urban design firm based in San Francisco. Heidi has worked on urban development and transit-centered projects for over 30 years, including station areas for BART, Caltrain, and LA Metro. She is currently a consultant to the California High-Speed Rail Authority focusing on station area planning, early site activation, and community engagement. She has taught urban design at San Jose State University and at the Bauhaus University in Weimar. Finally, let's welcome Kristopher Takács, an architect and urbanist who leads AECOM's global practice for stations and transit-oriented development, a multidisciplinary team of designers, transportation experts, and land planning strategists recognized for creative technical expertise that connects people, buildings, and places. Kristopher has been instrumental in the creation of award-winning multimodal passenger facilities and mixed-use urban developments around the world, including Denver Union Station and Brightline, Florida. And at this point, I think, Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Asha, and thank you, Heidi and Kristopher, for joining me today in this panel. Heidi, I'm going to have Heidi advance slides for us. So can we go ahead with the first one? We have been on a bit of a a trip around the world since December. Are you able to get that? Yeah, thank you. So we started it with a session on France with Fabrice Moreno of the French Railways. Then in January we had a session with Eduardo Romo, who has a lot of experience in Spain. Heads the foundation there in Spain on rail, Caminos de Hielo. And then a couple of weeks ago, we had Tobias Kyle, who works for the German firm that has designed a lot of big stations and airports around the world, including my backdrop, which is Berlin Main Station, one of the great examples of multimodal facility design in the world. And they've also done work on China. So we heard a little bit about that too, and some of the different considerations and the different contexts there. So I'm going to start with that, and then we're going to just briefly talk a little bit about the relevance of some of these lessons for the U.S. And then before I turn it over to Heidi, Heidi and Kristopher, and Heidi especially is going to talk about Brightline, Florida, and the approach there to really a high level of passenger customer service for passenger rail. And so obviously that's a model that we're very interested in, all of us who work in this field nationally. What can we expect in terms of broader applicability of that model nationally? So that's and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. All right, next slide, please, Heidi. So we started in France, and I'm not gonna. If you can click, Heidi. This is a photo of Bordeaux Saint-Jean. So in the heart of the French city of Bordeaux, obviously famous for wine, right? But this is a historic station that was, totally rebuilt as France extended a high-speed line into this station and this region. From Paris over Tours, and it was it's a very impressive transportation and urban development project. Around the station, as you can see a little bit here, there's a big brownfield site, a redevelopment site, 2,000 acres actually. So they did a really impressive project to redevelop the station to accommodate many more trains and people, high-speed trains in particular, and to really capitalize on those investments in transportation by maximizing development. And so Fabrice reminded us that, train stations are always part of larger development and transport schemes. They straddle the local, regional, and even national scales. These are themes we heard also from some of the other speakers. Next slide, please, Heidi. He also talked to us about this is a fabulous example. If any of you have been there, this is the station of Saint-Lazare, Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. Actually, not a high-speed station, but a very impressive station redevelopment project. Highlighting the main point here that's at the top, that train station serves both as the front doors of cities. Often people arrive at cities. This is their first view of the city. So, that first impression is very important. And as primary economic drivers for them. So Fabrice talked to us about Gare Saint-Lazare. It's an adaptive reuse project. This quite large mall that is perpendicular to the tracks. The tracks there, it's a stub end configuration. And you have this big shopping mall right at the stations. And we heard from Fabrice also about how profitable these shops are. I remember him telling, actually not in this webinar, but I heard him previously, there's a Foot Locker store in here that grosses 4 times the amount, the dollars, the money per square foot as a typical Foot Locker. And of course, that's related to, a lot of people coming through here. So maybe people have a little time to kill before they catch their train. And so anyway, there's a great symbiotic relationship here between the commercial use and the transportation use. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we heard from Eduardo, like I said, last month in January. He talked to us quite a bit about, we were interested, Spain was really transformed by high-speed rail. And outside of China, China's obviously, we've heard, developed quite a massive high-speed rail network, the largest in the world in a short time frame. But within the European context, Spain gets the first prize. And so we heard a bit about the importance of developing in order to build political support. And in turn, when you build the political support, typically the funding comes with that. You need to deliver an initial operating segment or a proof of concept that really shows people the value of this investment. And so in this case, they connected Madrid and Seville, two large urban centers, with a quality of service that people hadn't seen yet before. The time, the comfort, all of it was very compelling. And then that in turn built the political support for building out a national network. And then, of course, we heard a bit, and we'll hear more about Germany, right? There was an opportunity. This is when the European Union was also investing quite a bit in connecting the continent by rail and high-speed rail. So there were new pots of funding available, and Spain was strategic and smart in presenting this project, this first line, not just to the voters of Spain, but also to the European Union, and getting quite a bit of European Union funding for the product. So capitalizing on these, political, these particular windows of opportunity to get things done. Next slide, please. And then we also heard, similar things from Eduardo, as we heard from Fabrice, right, about the need and the desire in many cases to, along with the transportation project, really to focus development around these big transportation investments. And so in Madrid, there's one of the largest redevelopment sites in Europe around Madrid's Chamartín station. So as you can see in this rendering, the project's not built yet, but tracks, right? We're familiar in English with this expression, right? The other side of the tracks, right? Tracks divide communities, but there's an opportunity if you design them well, with some sensitivity to the urban fabric, the community they go through, but you also need a lot of vision and multidisciplinary thinking. You can do something like this, right? Where, if you read the literature on this, they talk about healing the wound created by the rail infrastructure. So a really great example of transportation and city building here. Next slide, please. And then we heard just recently from Tobias Keil 3 weeks ago. He was actually visiting us in San Jose and in San Francisco. So we got to meet with him. And we talked quite a bit. I mean, in my opinion, the Berlin main station, which his firm designed, is really the gold standard of multimodal facility design, right? You have national, regional, and local rail services intersecting under one roof. You got the east-west on this upper level that you see, where you see this high-speed train, and then if you look down below, you see the many north-south tracks as well. So yeah, we learned that the world's best multimodal hubs promote mobility across scales by facilitating seamless transfers between the modes. And it's also important to note, that these facilities, they don't design themselves. That might sound a little bit like a joke, but it's true. They're very complicated, and they require not just technical know-how, but you need to seize windows of opportunity like they did in Spain, as I just discussed a second ago. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So in the case of Berlin, the window of opportunity was German reunification. So that was an opportunity in the ways that I've discussed already. The political will, there was, as you can see here on the left, that was the trajectory of the Berlin Wall, right, through the center of Berlin. And then you see the photo on the right, Brandenburg Gate. The main station is a little sort of up to the right. You see the Reichstag, the historic building. So the new main station is just behind that. And when the wall stood, these pieces of land that were up against the wall, especially on the west, they were viewed as sort of they were on the edge of civilization, like at the end of the world. That was the sort of the mindset. But then the wall came down, and as you can see in this image on the right, that's in the smack dab in the middle of the city. And what better place to build a central station than in smack dab in the middle of the city? Typically, you don't have the good fortune of having available land, but that's definitely the silver lining of the dark period in German history and the division, that this was something they could capitalize on. Next slide, please. So just quickly, this was as you can see, under the divided Germany, fully separate rail lines, east and west, and click please. And then with reunification, enormous amount of political support, and along with it, the funding to reconnect. Not just, and Berlin in many ways is like a microcosm of the country, right? So Berlin was divided just as the country was, right? And of course, as we know, this western part here, that was an island of the free world in the Soviet bloc. And so the desire to connect the country through, the city and then the country through improved rail connections, transportation infrastructure. And that's where this concept that they call the mushroom concept or the Pilz concept came out of, right? So, not just to have a main station in the middle, but also what are some ways we can facilitate regional mobility with a network of inner city rail stations that provide that mobility, facilitate that mobility across scales that I was talking about. Next slide, please. And so here you see the how it works. So the north-south lines in the dashed blue, and then the east-west on the elevated level in red. Next slide, please. And then we heard a bit about Tobias. It's a topic that I know many of us here, panelists, care quite a bit about, right? Like, really, we need to think about when we invest big sums of money in rail infrastructure, it's because rail is particularly good at doing certain things, providing certain types of mobility, right? And I think this image shows that quite well. Of course, you can build a freeway interchange through the center of a city, and you can, if you build enough lanes, at least for a little while, you can get free-flowing traffic through there. But people ultimately need to get out of their vehicles in order to do whatever it is that they're moving about for in the first place, right? So travel is not typically the end in of itself, but at a train station, this very much gets blurred, right? People are on their way to some destination, but they can also maybe there's a meeting right near Berlin main station. Maybe there's they need to take care of some errands, get some sort of product, and they can take care of that at the station, and they can meet people. And we heard a little bit the great anecdote, right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There were quite a few Ukrainian refugees who came. This was their first impression of Germany. They came here, so a place for people to quickly access services and all that. All that happens right here in this building. Hard to imagine it happening here under these this maze of freeways. Next slide, please. I think I'm turning it over to you shortly.
It's just not responding right now. Let's see.
Oh, sorry. So I know that we are about. If you need to stop, I can keep going a little bit and set up the discussion on. Right. So we heard a little bit about China as well, and China is interesting in that initially they set up the system. It was viewed very much like an airport. These stations. How can we connect? A station in an urban region to another station, urban region, maybe not with a keen intention to capitalize on some of the advantages of rail that I've just been talking about, right? So in this case, you can see in Tianjin, the station is not really part of the urban fabric. You see all these parking facilities around it. You see the dense development, not within walking distance, maybe not that far, but the station is quite separate from the city. In any case, this, and if you go to the next slide, in this initial model, it was designed to handle very large peak flows of passengers. Okay, and so this is, I think, it's just for the Chinese New Year. So these stations were designed to handle these big flows. Next slide, please. Over time, though, there's been an evolution, according to Tobias, to, in some ways maybe emulate in some ways the European models, right, where stations become more integrated into the surrounding urban fabric. So this is a very impressive example where almost the entire station infrastructure is accommodated below grade, and above grade we have very dense development, as you can see here. Next slide, please. Okay, and with that, that was our tour of the world. We thought it would be good to also touch on recent developments in our country, in our context, especially, and we think the Brightline project is definitely a positive example of something that was done, creating really something new, I think, for customers in Florida. And we're especially here in California very interested in this because Brightline is also the project sponsor for the LA to Las Vegas high-speed line that is moving ahead, and according to latest news reports, breaking ground this spring. So we'll talk more about that, but I'll let first Heidi, who's done a great, she did a study trip there herself, really thought about what she was seeing, and did a great job documenting it. So I thought she would be a great person to bring in for this conversation today. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Heidi.
Thank you, Eric. It's a great overview of the last webinars. Yes, and I would like to move us a little bit closer to home, more specifically Florida. Like Eric already said, this is a higher speed train system, so it's not truly high speed. But Brightline West will go high, what would be defined as high speed. So I recently had the opportunity to go on a study trip there and experience Brightline just as a passenger. I mean, I'm obviously always observing things, but I wanted to see how that feels like. And I'm just going to take you along to a brief visual tour of what that customer experience feels like. Brightline puts a lot of focus on the customer experience, and they did this right from the beginning. And I came away from this trip thinking, maybe this is really what we need in order to get Americans to ride a train instead of flying or driving, so comfortable in the car. But what can we offer that can actually compete with driving and flying? And I think that they did a great job with this. So let me give you a quick overview of Brightline. Brightline is the first privately owned intercity passenger railroad in the US, and it currently connects Miami with Orlando Airport. And it has stations in between. Aventura, Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, and West Palm Beach. Initially, it was only Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach, and they added these two smaller stations in between as well to just reach more people. And the total length here is 235 miles. That takes about 3.5 hours to get from Orlando to Miami. And the speeds are 79 miles per hour between Miami and West Palm Beach, and then it gets a little faster at up to 125 miles per hour to Orlando. Brightline used an existing rail corridor, which of course made it a little bit easier than what we're trying to do here in California with high-speed rail, where we have to build everything new. And the service here started in 2018. And the service to Orlando started in 2023. So it's pretty recent. There is an expansion planned up to Tampa Station. I don't know when that's slated to be completed, but that would really bring, the West Coast also will connect to the West Coast as well. Just to give you a quick overview, there are 17 round trips on weekdays, 10 on Saturdays, and 9 on Sundays. Ridership numbers are triple what compared to what they expected. So when they started, there were about 560,000 passengers per year. And now in 24, we're already at 2.76 6 million passengers. So it's a very successful system from that point of view. Here you see the two terminus stations at the moment. Miami will always be the terminus, but Orlando will then change into a through station at some point. So Miami Central here on top. And then we have the and Orlando, and then Aventura, Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, and West Palm Beach down there at the bottom. And you can see, well, first of all, they're all located in near downtown areas, which is a very important point. But you can also see that there's a distinct architecture here with a certain type of branding. It's very recognizable that you're going to enter a bright line when you go by, you see the station. In Miami Central, you can always see this a little bit in this top picture. There's a lot of development on top of the station, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And this is also the station that has the most connections. It connects to the Miami Metro Mover, that's a local system, as well as the Tri-Rail and the Metro Rail. So this is a big intermodal station in Miami. Now, how do you use the Brightline as a passenger? So I had the pleasure to use it, and it was really easy. First of all, you have to get to the station. And as you know, Miami is pretty big. I stayed in Miami the first time I used it. And what you can do, you can use the door-to-door with service. And there are different options that you have. You can go very luxury. You can even order a Tesla, from what I heard. I personally use just a shuttle, like a shared shuttle, and that cost me about $5 for the ride to get from some neighborhood about 7 miles away to the station. So it's really easy to use. There's some shuttles are fixed. For example, in Fort Lauderdale, you can easily get to the airport because the station is not far away from the airport. And that's also very, very affordable. You can also book this all through the app that they offer. All stations also have connections to public transit, mostly buses. And I already talked about Miami, that this one has way more connections, like the Metro Mover here is a very unique system in Miami. But it definitely is easy to get there by bus as well. And if you arrive by car, you can get designated parking spaces. You can also book this through the app. In some locations, it is part of a larger development, like here in West Palm Beach or Miami Central. There's a standalone garage even. And then the Boca Raton example, you see this is a smaller parking garage where you can also park for the duration of your trip. Now, when you enter the station, what is that like? So here you see Miami Central. This is again part of a bigger development. On the ground floor lobby, you enter on the ground floor, you enter the lobby, and there you will have all the services that you need. There's information counter, ticket machines, luggage drop off, guest services, car rental counter, restrooms, and seating. So all of this area is public. Miami also has 2 cafes, one on the ground level as well as on the second level. The second level is going to be part of a larger retail center, but all of this is publicly accessible. At the smaller stations, they have a similar layout, no cafes, unfortunately, but all of this is all still public, a little smaller, but it's the same idea. That's where all the services are, right on the ground floor when you enter. And you can see here already that there's a distinct design and branding going on in even the smaller stations, always recognizable. And in some places, there's some very specific touches that tell you, which station you are. In Miami, there's some artwork, for example, that you can see that this is a little bit more localized. In general, the functional layout is the same in all the stations. It's not always exactly the same, but the function of it, how you move through it, is always the same. So passengers get really familiar with it. So once you're on the ground floor and you enter there, then you go up the escalators to the second level. oftentimes this level is bridging over the trucks. And you do have to go through some fare gates that you see right here on the top. And your luggage will also be screened. This is always a discussion too, like Eric showed Berlin, there's no luggage screening anywhere. You know, anyone can go to the platforms, but here it is definitely more secure. Then once you get through that, you enter a what we call a ticketed area. In here, you have the option to work, like in a large seating area that you see that everything's very generously designed. There's a bar. There's what they call a premium lounge. It's very similar to an airport experience where you just enter with your premium ticket and you can get food and beverages there. If you don't have much time, then you can also go to the grab and go store that you see right there at the bottom of the picture. With your app, you can just buy something really quickly and then get going. Before the train arrives, passengers use the escalators to go up or down, depending on the station. And then on the platform is the only area that is not air conditioned. That's very important in Florida. But you won't really stay there for long. There is shade. There's some seating opportunities there. And down here at the bottom, you see where the air conditioning is starting. Once you leave the platform, that's when you will be able to cool off again. So it's really short time that you will spend there. And then lastly, once you're on the train, this is just giving you an example. This is part of my study trip group. And it was really guided by a person from Brightline. There was a lot of interesting details. But you see how friendly the interior design is, very similar to a plane experience, but of course it has more space around you. And tray tables, at the seat, food and beverage services, which they come through really frequently, and you can buy food. Some of it is included in your premium ticket, so it's also very similar to an airport or plane ride experience. I also want to, and maybe if I want to summarize this, and this is also the way they describe it when we talk about customer service, they describe it as a crossover between an airport and hotel experience with an app that is really easy to use. And I think one of the points is it makes it very familiar to people who are used to air travel, except that you just have more space and it's all more relaxing to get to the station and make it really easy. So I think that kind of they have built on this notion that that's what people are expecting and using, and implemented it here for the train situation. And in addition to the strong focus on the customer experience, and they did this right from the beginning. I think this is an important point. So the retail, for example, the cafe was already operational when they opened up. What is also important here is to mention that there is development that is supporting the station development and investment. And Kristopher can tell us much more about it because you have worked on it for a long time. I just want to touch on this very briefly, just what I observed. Miami, I mentioned, has a lot of development on top of the station. Just to give you a rough idea, 800 apartments, 380,000 square feet of office space, 50,000 square feet of dining and grocery, 130,000 square feet of retail. So it's a major center that will draw people in, not just for travelers, but, for people who live there, people who live around the area. West Palm Beach has also seen a lot of residential development right at the station. You see that on the top picture right there. Boca Raton and and I want to mention West Palm Beach also in the bottom picture there, right at the station. There's office development together with the parking. So it's right there at the station. Boca Raton and Fort Lauderdale also in walking distance to the existing downtowns. There is some development. It's not as high density, but I think that might fill up over time. Aventura Station has also residential and offices and is also located just across the street from it is a shopping mall. And I thought it was important to kind of get a bit of an idea what the service would look like, because like Eric mentioned, Brightline is now investing in the Brightline West connection between Las Vegas and Rancho Cucamonga. And this is truly going to be a high-speed connection, which you see that here in the green line, where it says Brightline West. This will be a 218-mile connection, and it will mostly run in the median of I-15. So again, it's in an alignment that's already there, but of course it needs to be added to it. Some of the stations, the two more stations that are offered there is Apple Valley, which is it's called Victor Valley Station, as well as Hesperia. And these are going to be in the middle of I-15. So it's just a particular problem to deal with, how you get people there. But the nice thing is, Rancho Cucamonga was actually selected as the terminus station for Brightline, because from there you can use Metrolink to get to LA, as well as the Ontario airport with a planned people mover. So they didn't decide to go all the way to LA, but at least the connection is there. In Las Vegas, the station will be located south of the airport. You see that rendering on top there. That's about 11 miles away from downtown, so not ideal, but I'm sure that they are thinking about some ways how you can actually connect from downtown to Las Vegas, from downtown to the station. Sorry. I think Eric, you mentioned already. This is construction is slated to begin in spring 25. So this is already funded and it will be implemented. You see also this red line there. That's the High Desert Corridor, which is trying to connect the Victor Valley Station with Palmdale. And this is going to be a multi-use corridor. It's basically a GPS as a joint powers entity that came up with or is collaborating to implement this corridor. The idea here is that this corridor can be used by different train operators, whether it's high-speed train, California high-speed train, or Brightline, or a separate operator to connect to these two stations. And that will make Palmdale a major transportation hub, because California high-speed rail is coming there, Metrolink, and then whatever the connection is over to Brightline West. And I just wanted to give you a very, very quick glimpse of what is happening in Palmdale, which is a great example of collaboration between all the different entities that will be involved with this. This is just a concept plan, was coming out of workshops between the city, California High-Speed Rail, Metrolink, Metro, High Desert Corridor, and AVTA. These were all done in a series of workshops based on the planning that Palmdale had already done with their transit area specific plan. And so these are just first ideas how you can create a destination in Palmdale, but they currently don't have a great downtown center. So for them, it would be a great opportunity to put them on the map.
Okay.
And now I would actually like to bring in Kristopher. Maybe you can just stop here and go back to maybe some of the Brightline image like here. So Kristopher, I would like to bring you in the discussion, because you have worked so much on it. I'm just looking at the time right now. Okay, I think we still have time. Since I don't know if you want to add anything. Like I said, these were just my personal observation as a passenger with an designer's view. And I've done a little bit of research on what I heard on the study trip, but I think there might be a few things that you would like to add. And then we could maybe also go to two questions that I have for you. One, do you think that the customer focus of Brightline is a model, for getting people onto the train? Because that was just my theory. And And then maybe you can also touch a little bit on how important the TOD development was to get this system going.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for including me today. These two questions are both essential questions, really, about transit and rail travel in the U.S., and really ultimately about city building and some of the larger existential questions that Eric talked about in the beginning. The knock-on effect of investing in mobility and what that does to catalyze urbanism and redevelopment. And Brightline is such an interesting example because in a way it really is back to the future. The railroad that they used to create this new service, this 21st century novelty for Americans, was only possible because it was the Florida East Coast Railroad, which came before any of the towns on the East Coast of Florida. The railroad came first, the towns grew around the railroad. And this company that formed Brightline is a legacy landowner of the railroad and about 2,000 acres of land around the corridor. It's literally, they are the descendant of the Flagler Company. So they were able to do this because they already controlled land. And they were thinking of ways to create a new service, but also be a constructive force of redevelopment that served the city goals and created new value, both for themselves, of course, as a commercial firm, but also in sync with policy. So it was a really incredible and very unique opportunity for them. I want to answer your questions, though. I think they're really good. So the first one, Heidi, you asked me was, does the kind of service that they offer give us a new way of thinking about inducing Americans onto trains, right? And I would have to say yes, because there's some innovation in their thinking about the service. But I don't want that to sound like it's completely new, because I would say every transit authority, including ones that run some major train services in the U.S., are very committed to excellent passenger service and moving the needle. And if you ride the trains as much as I do, on the Northeast Corridor with Amtrak or wherever around the world. Yesterday I was in Toronto riding Via. These are very high quality services. What are they connecting? And what are they offering you as a traveler going from A to B? That's the part that they can't control. They run the trains. They give you the experience of boarding and alighting. They give you the wraparound services and the experience as a person that's traveling through time and space. But it takes literally a whole village to move the needle in the urbanism part. And, that's something that I think what I've loved about this series that you're doing. And it's what we talk about every day in our jobs is how to bring these players together, these unnatural collaborators, in order to do something that's higher and better together, because it does take it takes the train service, it takes the micro mobility, right? It takes land use policy, and it takes a lot of courage and capital in order to make the right moves that have that synergistic and symbiotic impact. In terms of the train service, the hospitality model that you talked about, you said crossover between hotel and airport experience. I love that. I remember the very early days when they were kind of cooking that up as their business model. The one thing that always stuck in my mind, because these are very savvy, developers that have done a lot of, incredible value creation. And I remember them saying that just because you create a great train experience doesn't mean that people are going to buy tickets and travel the train, right? The service has to actually address an unmet market demand. And so that is really the nucleus, I think, of what you have to answer first. And then you want to do it with excellence. So in Florida, the business case is that why should you not have a very reliable, wonderful, enjoyable ground-based alternative to the other modes. Like their motto is, it's too short to fly between Orlando and Miami, but it's too far to drive. And that's perfect. When you look at the models of where people travel in a high-speed rail in Europe or in Asia, there's a certain geographic distance that's natural. People don't want to really be on a train for more than 3 hours, right? So there's a natural limitation to that. But when you fill that service and then you do it in a way that blows people's minds, makes it comfortable, makes it enjoyable, makes it fun, maybe even makes it the preferred way to connect, then you have a winning business case for that. We always joke that, like, when you provide high-speed trains in particular, between cities, you're sort of warping the time-space continuum, because you're making those places connect to each other much faster than is in the natural world. But what you're also doing when you think about trains as a moving hotel or some other metaphor, you're messing with people's own expectations about work-life balance, about how you split your time, right? And I think contemporary people like myself who are working all the time, on the go, I want to be able to have a Zoom meeting when I'm going 200 miles an hour. Like that's my expectation. And that's really hard to do. you have to want to do that, right? And then that has to become part of your offer. And if you do that, then suddenly you've invented something that is new. So anyway, that's one. So your second question, I just talk quickly to the role of transit-oriented development. That was, for Brightline, is very, very important to them from the very beginning. In fact, probably started as maybe even the bigger motivation than the trains. And it's because they already controlled a lot of land. So for them, the development of value, new buildings, real estate investments, these are professional commercial real estate developers. You make an asset and then you make money on it, right? So the train was about bringing the people and creating destinations. You also want the train system to be a self-sustaining and excellent business venture also, but the two have to work as part of the same equation. And they were able to do that because they could create and capture the value on land that they already controlled. In the end, they also ended up creating a lot of value for other people outside of their organization, which is what we want. That's the power of the magnet. Miami Central, which you see here in the left, that was the original site of Flagler's Miami Central Station, which was a single-story depot on a few terminal tracks. And then when they raised that building in the 1960s, when Americans stopped riding trains and were focused on interstate highways, it became a surface parking lot, a very lucrative one for many years because it served the government center neighborhood in Miami. So when they decided that this would become the location for Miami Central #2, it really truly was back to the future. And the question was, how do we get the highest and best use and value out of it? And what we did here, you see, is with 3 towers and this incredible, heroic, almost Roman-scaled viaduct with trains 50 feet in the air, concourses, retail, restaurants. At one point, we considered a bowling alley, and the streets, the urban streets feed underneath it. So that's the viaduct lifts the infrastructure up so that the city can still exist below. That spatial organization required a lot of study about how to calibrate it the right way so that it would all work. And what you see here is a very clever 4-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. It's like Tetris to try to get it to all. So the buildings themselves aren't really overbuilds. They're conventional buildings that thread down through the ground. There's very little structural gymnastics to them because they have to be buildings with a pro forma that works. The train station also had to be done in a way that was commercially and economically viable to build. So how do you do all of that together in 3D with trains moving in the fourth dimension back and forth and people feeding up there? This solution is, I think, ideal for this particular site. You wouldn't be able to just copy paste this anywhere else. But it explains why the platforms are spaced the way they are and where the tracks go and how they're paired up together so that it works to facilitate the vertical development above it. You have to think like a transit architect and a multifamily architect and a commercial architect all at the same time. And that's how we really created a pretty unique place for Brightline.
Great. Thank you, Kristopher, and Heidi. I think we have just a few minutes for questions here. And I see some similar themes. I might try to thread a few together. And so I liked what you just said, Kristopher, about, actually, I guess we can maybe summarize some of the lessons, but, I went through the top ones here, the key insights. And then I think we've also addressed a lot of the concluding thoughts as well, right? So I think both Kristopher and Heidi are suggesting that Brightline is a successful, a hopeful model anyway. We don't know if it will do everything we need. Maybe it won't produce Berlin main station for us in Palmdale or something like that. But maybe it won't help us achieve all the great urban transit connections we might want to see in Las Vegas, right? But anyway, it's a good first step, and maybe it also helps us think what do we need. I mean, there are some questions here about a lot of questions here about what do we do now? There's a lot of uncertainty with funding at the federal level, and I think that's the first one to get out of the way first. So I mean, I think all of us who work on these projects, we know that first off, they take a very long time, and they require a lot of vision. They require a lot of steadfastness. So you need continued political support. You need funding. But for those of us who work more in the planning, the early stages of projects, the silver lining we often mention is that when there's not a lot of capital funding, it's a good time to plan, right? And you do need to develop proper plans to make sure these projects happen right over the long term. Quickly, Kristopher, you mentioned how you touched on whether the Miami example is a replicable one, and you said in some ways it is some elements of it, but it is typically these big central city stations they have more customization. We did get a question from the audience here about, it says, what differentiators are planned on station design in the California High-Speed Rail project, especially to provide good connections with other modes of transportation. So I'm not sure I fully understand all that is intended there in that question, but I think to create a great quality service, that doesn't necessarily mean a customized station. So you can create more standard station solutions. I know for those of you who have read How Big Things Get Done by Ben Fluvier, he talks about the development of the Madrid Metro, really great example. They had like 5 standard station designs that they tweaked them a little bit depending on context, but basically the expensive design work and the fabrication, you keep costs down by having modular design. Anything more? As Heidi, I know you worked in the Central Valley quite a bit. Anything more you want to add there?
I think from my perspective, a nice thing is that in the Central Valley, people always were kind of questioning why it was the first segment. I think part of it was so much easier to get that done. It's a little bit like the proof of concept, Eric, that you mentioned with the Spanish stations. And the nice thing in Central Valley is that it does connect the cities again. These were also developed at a time where the railroad came in, right? The history is based on rail. And downtown Fresno, Bakersfield is a very large city. getting train service there that's high quality and high speed, I think will put them on the map of California in a much different way than they, in the last decade had, or let's say, no, longer than that, the last 50 years have been kind of economically, it was really challenging for them. And I think that would be a great opportunity for these cities in the Central Valley. And I think my only thought is that we really need to think about the connectivity and how you, like we've seen all the options how you can get to stations. I mean, you have to make it very easy for people to get to the station in order to use it. And maybe since these are in downtowns, we should maybe get away from the thought that everything has to be only car access. And in order to do that, you need to, avoid huge parking lots everywhere. And Brightline, I think they made a conscious decision to put this in structures already. Yeah. I don't know how the financing worked there, but I think that is also important, think about the systems, how they integrate with the existing systems in order to get people to use it.
I just want to say that I'm optimistic that we're going to move the needle. I think that this, younger generation that is coming up in America, I don't think we're going to have the same old boring, tired arguments trying to convince people that that great connectivity is actually a public service. I think they expect that, and so we want great connectivity. We want it to be world class, and we want world class urbanism to meet the need also. And so, walkable urbanism at the footstep of the station, bringing the station to the city to the station. That's really the game for us. And I think for America, it is a moonshot. It's a work in progress. But if we can do it and have proof of concept, like we're seeing in Miami, and export that in other places, and and not just create it new. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff there. We're filling gaps. We're bringing people to to get out of their cars, and not necessarily frame it like this. It's a binary conversation. It's not a battle against the car. We want both and in the U.S. And if we can do that with excellence, then we'll win.
Yeah, great thought, Kristopher. I guess the one challenge though is to the degree, and in some cases it does make sense, as a first step to attract people by car, right? Well, in the Brightline example, it's maybe more ride sharing, but to the degree that there is park and ride, and that's maybe something that's necessary in some of these lower density, let's say California Central Valley places without the robust, you have to think about how do you accommodate that in the short term on opening day without precluding that future that you described, the world-class urbanism. And frankly, I mean, the reality about cars, right, is that they, I showed that image of that from Tobias in Berlin, right, the interchange versus exchange. Cars just take up a lot of space, right? And we want to make the most of a big investment in transportation, and cars just aren't that efficient for it. So how do you maybe allow that in the early years when there's less demand, but don't end up in a situation where you're hardwiring sort of transportation access behavior. All right.
No, I give you an example of that because I think you're right. There's an incremental strategy there for sure that you have to define up front and then be fearless about implementing it. I mean, the French did that in some of their high-speed rail stations. The Chinese have that also. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's also you're not building for the next 30 years day one. Sometimes you have to take a more incremental growth approach to it. When you have a situation where you have an existing city that is walkable, and you're doing a rail station because there's a new service, like in Denver, we were able to create an infill neighborhood around transportation, and we provided zero parking. But you have to have the city there first.
Okay, well, great. I know we're actually out of time already, and there's a lot more that we could have discussed, and I would like to have discussed. Anyone in the audience, feel free to reach out to me or any of the other panelists for follow-up questions, discussion. And just again, we mentioned at the beginning on the subject of workforce development, people attending this webinar may be interested to learn that MTI sponsors an online graduate program in transportation management. I'm just going to put the information here. You can contact me or Asha Weinstein Agrawal about that, and I'll just put that in the chat right here. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I really enjoyed the session and the questions and the series. We'll think about, I've gotten some suggestions about doing future sessions, so definitely we'll entertain those and look forward to talking with all of you again soon. Thank you very much.